Greetings! It is I, Tantus Van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Welcome to those of you who are watching this over on the YouTube channel, and those of you who are joining me live on Twitch.tv, both the Dracovin Empire. Of course, there's great ways of English, work, thing, thank you. You know, it's not a video like this if I don't speak English really terrible. It's not me talking about something. Anyway, we're going to talk about tabletop today. We do normally on most of these days, and we're going to dive into Mage The Ascension again. My brain will come back later on, and I'll probably give shout-outs to both of the channels and, you know, all that support stuff at the end of the video. So please hang around to the end there. But I will have one thing here. If you're joining either live or on YouTube, have you either encountered Marauders or used them in some way in your games? Let me know, because these are a group we're going to talk about today, Marauders, that are definitely antagonistic in Mage in a way, but we'll get into it. We'll talk about that. But the fact is that, you know, we've run through a lot of the basic factions in Mages, and there's a few more still to hit on. And then maybe we'll see about what we're going to talk about next in Mage. But for now, why don't you join me as we look at Marauders. Now, the first thing I have to tell you about is there are 2 books to shout out today. And everything has just been peachy keen on my system today. I'm letting you know. We might have a little bit of hiccups because I was having this earlier trying to get this stream started. So there's 2 books to look into, and they're both called the Book of Madness. This is the original one, and then there is a revised edition Book of Madness. And they provide more than just Marauders. I do have a copy, PDF copy of Book of Madness Revised, where it talks also about things like the Nefandi a little bit, which we've talked about in previous episodes, Infernals, Umbrood, a lot of other groups. And we might talk about some of those, but those also might be more specific, less faction-y things, so that's maybe future stuff. But for now, just the Marauders. And so if you want to dive a little deeper, I would recommend getting a copy of this. But again, a lot of what the basics are is going to be up on the White Wolf Wikipedia. It's usually pretty good Wikipedia. And I usually use those as a basis for mine, supplemented with stuff from those books. So, and the Book of Madness also gives information less for playing a Marauder, because you're really not playing a Marauder, but using them as either antagonistics or NPCs in your games, how you would use them. Things like the various abilities they'd have, the flaws, merits, powers, all that kinds of stuff. Various different ways about how their quiet exists within them. We'll talk about this. So, anyway, what is a Marauder? They're insane. That's the easiest way to describe them. But that's not really a great way to describe them. Effectively, their avatars are warped because they have a mental instability. So they have a mental illness, and that mental illness, as a mage, has warped the very essence of their magical being, so they are in a permanent state of quiet. And I think we've mentioned quiet before in some of the other episodes of Mage, where we talked about stuff. And it's basically a affecting of reality. The quiet is when, effectively, delusions start moving into your own personal reality, and these delusions become real to you because you're magical and you can alter reality. So it's sort of like you are delusional, and it distorts your view of reality in a way, too. It's a little hard to explain, but I'm trying my best, you know. Sometimes these things are, you know. Quiet is normally temporary. It can be permanent. Marauders have a permanent sort of quiet to them. A permanent state of madness. And effectively, there are different types of quiet. There's madness, dynamic quiet. So madness, of course, goes to Marauders. Clarity, a static one, and Johor, and entropic. We're going to dive, of course, into madness, because that's the one that Marauders have. So, yes. So when we talk about madness, we are more talking about the version of quiet, rather than more, they're a crazy person. But they are usually also a person with a mental illness. So, yeah. Madness itself, the type of quiet, is for mages who are overwhelmed by raw, random changes and chaos, has hallucination, sensory deprivation, formation of hobgoblins and mindscapes. You become trapped in a reality-changing world created by your own mind, can't determine real from imagined. And so Marauders are in this permanent state. They can't connect to anything in the actual world. Madness's effects are very random, and depending on how much paradox you have, it can just overwhelm you, or very nastily just might spike up. You never know. So think about this is what Marauders are permanently suffering from. These are people that are permanently suffering from a disassociation with reality, where because of your own mystical abilities, you can't tell real from fake because you never know when things could be kind of bad. It's, a little crazy. So those mages that are favored to dynamism, one of the metaphysic trinity over static and entropy, those are the ones that form into madness of the quiet. So Marauders embody this. They will basically be connected around the fact that they fracture reality to a bit around them. What does this mean? Well, they kind of constantly, subconsciously use vulgar magic around themselves. Effectively, the thing is, normally a mage is suffering from quiet and from madness. Sure, you're telling the difference between reality, but you still have a level of control over you. A Marauder loses that control, so they start to use their magic uncontrollably, and will oftentimes use vulgar magics around them to affect the reality that they believe is real, which might not be. They have a bubble of alternate reality that's around them, where their hallucinations and whatever rules they are believing at the time about reality become real. If you are a creature or object that comes into contact with this bubble, you will be reshaped to those rules. You'll be returned to normal once the Marauder moves on, and there will probably be no evidence of what happens. But the effects of conscious magic remain. So if you're an awakened mage or a supernatural creature and you enter into a Marauder's bubble, you can tell something's wrong. Or anyone that has any kind of supernatural awareness will tell something is wrong. The resonance and the strength of it that a Marauder has tells you how much size and power this reality bubble is. And it's dominated, of course, by dynamic, because it's dynamicism. Though there are touches of static and entropic resonance in there, too. Talking about magical stuff. Which we've been talking about before. Anyway. Basically, what's going on is there is an external quiet of this Marauder, and it actually protects them from paradox, quite strangely. Effectively, they have an alternate reality around them that they are creating in this bubble, and this is their paradigm. And so, whatever vulgar magic they use within their bubble, their alternate reality that they're forming around them because of their quiet, doesn't violate the rules of that reality. This will attract backlash, but it means that most backlash that happens to awakened creatures that are outside the bubble. So that's the danger of being around a Marauder. Less that they themselves create paradox which affects them, and as if I'm around a Marauder and I'm a mage, they're causing paradox technically within their reality, but their reality doesn't have the paradox. Paradox is basically a bubble of drawn paradox around this bubble of reality they create that doesn't pierce it, but might hit you because you're around it. This power could make them seem invincible. They're mad still. Their insanity, their mental illness hampers them. They can't become archmage. They can't get insight. They're incapable of appreciating truths that don't connect in with their own insanity and broken reality. So, as much as they can get powerful, they can't reach levels of magic and power that a lot of other mages can. So, generally speaking, if we're talking about Marauders as a group, they're loners. Most of them. Sometimes they will form small groups called a fusion if they share a very similar quiet. There's also the infamous Umbral Underground, which is a collection of Marauder terrorists who fight against static and entropic reality. The most famous of the cells are the Butcher Street Regulars, who have zoo terrorism. The Avatar Storm weakened them, cut them off from their leaders and the mystical beats that they interact with in the Umbra. They're now led by the regular leader, Robert Davenport, who's a self-aware Marauder. Very highly self-aware. So that's the thing is, and Marauder can become aware of what they are, but it is kind of difficult to do. You know, it's you can't get beyond it, but it just can happen. Anyway, so the most terrifying of all groups related to Marauders is the, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, Chayoth Ha-Kwadesh. It was known as the Bai Dai. They're mages that believe it might be possible to restore the old days of free magic by basically murdering several billion humans and making concessions easy to manipulate. So yeah. You know, consensus, what reality is believed by the billions of people, and so when you remove most of the people in the world, maybe it's easier to manipulate that and bring back those dark ages where people believed more in magic and it was easier to do. Effectively, the disparate Bai Dai have been organized by a cabal called the Styrin, which is Cabal's a group of mages. They kill people in large numbers as often as possible. They're divided into smaller groups whose quiets agree with each other, like the Underground. The Chaitoth High Pradesh have a static clarity quiet that's distinct from their permanent quiet, which they can sometimes slip into. So, yes. Marauders. They're not all villains, but some of them embrace the madness. Now, this is a rage card. We haven't talked about rage at all, I think, ever on this channel. It's a Werewolf Apocalypse card game, similar to there's a Vampire the Masquerade card game, so we're just noting it now. We'll maybe talk about it one day. But I'm using it because it's an image of a Marauder. So, let's talk about Marauders and the various versions of them, because they have evolved a little bit, and we haven't seen a lot of evolution in the M20 and beyond at this point in time, but again, they are kind of an issue because, yes, the thing about, I'll talk about this in a second. Let's talk about the additions, and then we'll talk about why Marauders are a unique thing that it's hard to talk about sometimes. So, in 2nd edition, they're more cognizant, and they're more group-related. Things like the Umbra Underground, using the Umbra, were more important, were more perceived as a thing. They were satiated with things of dynamicism, like changing breeds, changelings. The Marauders chapter in Book of Madness was narrated by Korax, named Johnny Gore, who relates the experience with the Butcher Street regulars. And the revised, they were made darker and more and less coherent, basically treating madness more seriously. And I think that's the important thing. They treated mental illness more seriously in the revised edition that the earlier editions did not. They were kind of similar to Malkavians were in revised edition. And the Avatar Storm was a convenient explanation for the Underground's loss of power and influence. And they'd become more vulnerable to paradox. And regulars were a cell in the Underground, and cells were compatible quiet. So, that's the basics of Marauders. There's not a lot to talk about today, and I can dive into the depths of stuff that is within the various, the 2 books of madness where they go over things for Marauders, but it's a lot of speaking about this madness, this overwhelming, and I've kind of like given the basics of what Marauders really are. They're the unfortunate people that, yes, it's similar to those that suffer from mental illness. Many people that suffer from mental illness are perfectly fine people that are trying to live their lives and trying to either overcome their afflictions or find ways to live with their afflictions that fits within our society. But there are people in amongst them that are exceptions, that become violent, become deadly, become murderous, become criminals. And they do put a stigma on that. And it's the similar way with Marauders. We can see that's the exact same thing. Your average Marauder is mentally unstable. But they don't really try to do anything with their reality. It just happens to be that way. Are they dangerous? Unfortunately, yes, because of their reality warping abilities and the fact that they are dangerous to mages and awakened beings. That's the thing, too. A regular, non-awakened being, or most supernatural beings, may sense something is wrong, but will not be affected by it, because most of them are unaffected by paradox. So entering into the shift of reality and then leaving it again will be perfectly fine. It comes to Marauders are dangerous for mages. And yes, it doesn't mean that there isn't a danger in a warped reality where you do not know the rules of physics and vulgar magic could happen at a moment's notice. You could enter into this reality and become injured or dead without even realizing that you're in a vulgar reality. And then when you're out of it, it would just be accepted that some kind of accident or something happened. And would this necessarily be the Marauders' fault? No, it's not. There are people suffering, and their suffering has allowed their magical abilities to get out of control. And yes, again, there are those that are dangerous. It's the thing with a lot of other these groups. There are those that are dangerous within them, and there are those that are not dangerous within them. When we talk about the Council of 9 Magic Traditions, or even the Technocrats, it's very similar there. There are those that are probably very dangerous in amongst them, that are are originally with this group and maybe a little broken art for them. And the Marauders really are just a type. They're kind of lumped together, too. So I think it's an interesting group to talk about, but it does bring up a lot of things that you have to consider when using a Marauder. And when are they going to be someone that has given in to their mental illness and is becoming violent, or has a belief that is ultimately very destructive, a reality that they form, that they believe in, that they want to exist? Or is it something a little bit more simple or similar, and that they are just someone suffering you're going to find against? It's really hard to tell, and I think that's the thing that this is why we've taken the step back when we come to M20, because there is ways of addressing this, and certainly V20 addressed Malkavians quite well. They did a good job of dealing with them. Malkavians have a madness to them, but they also, they suffer from something. It is a curse to them as much as vampirism is a curse to them. And the misuse of Malkavians, I think, has dropped to a degree, but it is still there. And I think that's one of those things that I've always looked at, that, why a lot of storytellers don't use Malkavians. It's a similar way, or not that they wouldn't use Malkavians, don't allow players to use Malkavians, because they can't control them in a reasonable manner. A lot of players do not. And I think it same comes down to Marauders. You really couldn't have a Marauder character in a group because of the nature of them. So they have to really be an NPC. And even if you would allow a Marauder character, it just unbalances things in a strange sort of way that just doesn't work very well. Talking about mental illness as supernatural creatures is a weird kind of direction to take. You don't think about it a lot, but Marauders, Malkavians, bring it out. And it's not to say that you can't have, honestly, great stories with that. Or a great character that's suffering from something and dealing with that in some kind of way. But it's just unfortunate that, we look at Marauders and those groups that are very violent and very deadly, give them a bad rep. And the fact that they are terrible to mages gives them a bad rep. You encounter a Marauder as a mage, you might just get some random paradox that's not even your fault. It's their fault. This was an interesting one to talk about because it does hit on storytelling aspects. And I've certainly, a lot of other places, in other videos and other sources, if you've watched me over the years, talked about you can do difficult topics. Marauders, really, if you take this seriously, are a difficult topic. But it doesn't mean it can't be a helpful one. And certainly, if you want to use those groups that are very violent, that are very deadly, that dive into the madness and decide, we're going to do something awful, that's perfectly fine. It is. It's perfectly acceptable. Those groups that I talked about that have various issues, that cause problems, that group together and do things very negatively to the world, you don't have to be Marauders to do that. But they are. Certainly, you could use that group and tell some great stories. Anyway, I think that's kind of enough touching on it today, and I did want to talk a little bit about this because, it's when you tell stories, you want to tell stories that feel real, are still fantastic, but also don't really display things in a way that are false. And by that I mean, certainly there's a lot of crazy Malkavian pranksters out there that do a lot of crazy stuff, but your average one that a lot of people do that's just a dick to everyone else, that's a player character. That's not a real character. And the same can be said if you're using a Marauder. Just because they're crazy doesn't mean you want to treat them. And not just because they're mentally ill doesn't mean you want to treat them crazy. That's the statement. There you go. Just because they're mentally ill doesn't mean you want to treat them crazy. So, here's my PSA for storytellers using Marauders. Do that. And for players using Malkavians, I think I talked about it in my Malkavian video. I'm going to mention it now because they're both related to mentally unstable people. Stop being a dick and just play it in an actual character. Anyway, that's it for today. I know we went into a tangent of something related to a little bit of vampire there, but it is a similar kind of thing when it comes to the way these characters are displayed. And again, Revised Edition did a better job of looking at it and saying, like, yeah, these guys are out here. Yeah, they can be a dangerous thing to your mages. They might not be. And if you're looking for more stuff, as I said, the Book of Madness Revised is probably the better book to look at. You know, as it goes into some depth, it gives them some information on various influences. It dives into the quiet, their connections with Paradox, Renaissance, and all that stuff, and, you know, Marauders in general. So I definitely recommend that if you want to dive into them and actually learn a little bit. Yeah, the Revised Book of Madness. It's your better bet in these. As I said earlier, if you're watching this live on Twitch, hey Twitch, thank you for joining me. Please just give a follow, and I hope you enjoyed all this. I do more of these things throughout the week. Joining me on YouTube, hey YouTube, subscription would be great, because just similar as Twitch can leave the comment, you can leave that comment too about your experience with Marauders and how they were done. And honestly, your experience with any character suffering from some form of mental instability. Because, yeah, I mentioned Marauders, yeah, I mentioned Malkavians, but